I've been an aerial cinematographer for the last 7 years, and today I'm going to show you how to set up the Mavic 3 Pro with the best camera settings. Let's get into it. After you have your drone entirely set up and activated, you're going to want to go into your settings, click top right 3 buttons, go through camera, and then as we start, you can see that you have photo. For the photo format, I want to use RAW because that gives me the best dynamic range, flexibility, and post-production. So it's at JPEG now. I'm going to go ahead and switch that to RAW. As far as the aspect ratio, since we're shooting with a drone and we're going to be outdoors 99% of the time, I want to have the widest aspect ratio possible. So I'm going to go ahead and choose 16:9 aspect ratio. The resolution is 20 megapixels. Great. Anti-flicker, that's to make sure that if you have any light frequencies that are giving you that light flicker, then it'll give it its best chance to not have that happen if it's just on auto. I leave that on auto. The histogram is cool because that'll show you light exposure and it'll show you if anything's peaking right here. It'll show you if anything's crushed in the blacks or if anything's crushed on the highlights. So I keep the histogram on. Back to settings. Then overexposure warning. You can see that the thing that's overexposed is the light that it's looking at. And you can see that those zebra lines start really distracting me from seeing what's actually in the image. So I usually keep my overexposure warning off because it gets very distracting while flying. And then the grid lines, I like to use the rule of thirds. On frame guide, I keep that off. And then we go to white balance. I never do auto white balance because if you're doing a long flight, the white balance could change from one area to the next scene and it starts to look weird. So make sure you do manual white balance. Usually when you're outdoors, you want to keep it at around 5,600 to 6,000. I think that DJI products in the log profile usually go a little cooler. So I keep my white balance around 6,000. And then the storage, that's where you're going to have your SD card and everything. Cool. Custom folder naming, I like to do that. I like to change it so when I have different cameras. So I'll go ahead and custom folder name one. I'll name this one Mavic 3 Pro. Awesome. Create that. That'll give me the custom file naming. So when I have other cameras in my projects, I can make sure I know how to find the Mavic really quickly as opposed to seeing between an Aveda or a different drone option. Cache when recording, I just keep that as the default, keep it set on. Max video cache capacity 2 gigabytes, yeah, because it'll just overwrite. Now that's where you can get a good amount of custom settings in your camera, but then to actually dial in the precise camera settings that I use, let's go into each. So the photo, you click right here, you'll see you have photo options, and then where you can really dial in and get professional photos is changing this camera button from auto to pro. Now you can start to change your shutter speed, your ISO, and your aperture. So I turn all of that off of auto, which if it's on auto, it'll give you a good, quick recommendation. But when you're outdoors, you usually want to keep your ISO at the lowest possible, and then you want to move your shutter to at least 1/160th if you have a lot of action. You can do, and obviously I'm indoors so it doesn't look like it's exposed properly, but 1/160 allows you to capture motion pretty well, even higher shutter speeds if you're tracking something fast. So for instance, we do a lot of boat videography or photography, and if we're trying to get an action shot of a boat going 70 miles per hour down a lake, we want to make sure that the shutter speed is very high so that way there's not a lot of motion blur. Unless you're trying to be stylistic with motion blur, crank your shutter speed at least to 1/160, probably 200, 250, maybe even 500, because you want to be very precise on the frame capture of each individual photo. These settings really allow you to get your best exposure and make sure that you have the preferred stylistics. If you want more bokeh or if you want it to look just precise, just getting rid of the grain and everything. So that's where you change all those camera settings. And then let's switch into video. All right, now I just got all the photo settings changed. The only way to change the video settings is to switch in your camera. So right here, you have to go switch between photo to now I'm in video. Now you go up to this top right again. Now you can start to switch the camera settings for your video. Best format for video is going to be MOV. It gives you a lot more dynamic range of post. It's more lossless quality. It's a bigger file usually, and it just allows for better post-production. So best video format on the Mavic 3 Pro is MOV. Color, definitely not normal. Take it out of normal as soon as possible, unless you're not doing any post-production. If you want it to be looking good right out of the camera, then maybe some HLG would be good. But I'm gonna take it out of normal and put it into D-Log. That allows me the most dynamic range in post-production so I can get really good colors and preserve all the details and the highlights and the shadows and the blacks. This color display assist is perfect because then it makes it look like you're shooting in normal and it allows you to know what it's going to look like in post-production in the field. So I'm still shooting raw D-Log. Now I have this color display assist, and now it lets me know what it could look like in post-production. For the coding format, you have two options, H.264 and H.265. There's pros and cons to each. H.264 is going to allow for bigger file size with more data to where post-production is easier and it's not as compressed, so there's not as much processing power required in post-production. If you want a smaller file and you want to have it more compressed, H.265 is going to be the way to go. Since we'd like to do more post-production on our projects, we keep our codec at H.264 because we don't want it really small and compressed. We want as much data as possible to work with in post-production. And then the video bit rate is constant bit rate. The peaking level, I'll keep that on low. So I can reference it if it's in focus or not, but I don't want something too distractive on my screen. And then the overexposure warning, I definitely keep that off because it gets very distracting having the zebras on your screen while you're trying to fly, and if you're doing a long take video, you want to make sure you can see the entire screen and know where you're going, and the overexposure warning gets very distracting. And then the grid lines, I like to make sure that I have the rule of thirds. That's the greatest for me to really understand if I'm going to have it to where if I want to repurpose this landscape footage into a vertical aspect ratio in post-production, I can look at my rule of thirds and know like, oh, I have a third here, and a third here of the screen to where it could all be vertical essentially. So I definitely keep the grid lines of the rule of thirds on. All right, and then white balance, I like to keep it manual and at 6,000 because it's a little bit on the warmer side. And then custom folder naming transfers from the photo to video. So some of these things you don't have to change in both. Then I go back over here to change my camera settings. The highest resolution that this camera can shoot, 5.1K at 50 frames per second. So I'll keep that. And if I just look at it from top to bottom, my white balance is manual. I can change that here if I need to. And then 5K at 50, nice. And then make sure in D-Log, make sure you're in H.264, MOV. Constant bit rate, nice. So, all right, that's a walkthrough of the best camera settings for the Mavic 3 Pro. If you want to learn more about how you can fly like a pro and get paid like a pro, then click that like button, hit subscribe, and stay tuned for more.